April 2026. The supreme leader of Iran is dead. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passed, is closed. Lebanon has more than 1 million displaced people. Nations that never fired a shot at each other now exchange missiles over Persian Gulf capitals. And in the midst of all this, a fragile 2-week ceasefire attempts to hold back what already seems impossible to contain. The question millions of people are asking is not just political or military. It is biblical. Are we living through the acceleration of the end times? To answer this, you need to understand what has happened in the last 40 days. Because 40 days was all the time it took for the Middle East to change more than in 40 years. On the 28th of February 2026, Israel and the United States launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. The operation was called Lion's Roar by the Israeli side and Epic Fury by the American side. It was no ordinary attack. 3 locations where Iranian authorities were gathered were hit in less than 30 seconds. And among these targets was the personal complex of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, who had ruled the country for 37 years. Khamenei was killed in the attack. Along with him died the Minister of Defense, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard, and the Secretary of the National Security Council. Khamenei's daughter, his granddaughter, his son-in-law, and his daughter-in-law were also killed. The Iranian government declared 40 days of national mourning and 7 days of public holiday. Think of the scenario. An entire country wakes up without the leader who had commanded it for nearly 4 decades. The streets of Tehran were divided between mourning and celebration. While crowds dressed in black beat their chests and carried portraits of Khamenei, other people took to the streets to celebrate. In Los Angeles, home to the largest Iranian community outside of Iran, hundreds of people gathered with Iranian, American, and Israeli flags, shouting, "Freedom for Iran" and "No more Ayatollah." The division was so deep it seemed like 2 different countries reacting to the same event. But Khamenei's death was not the end, it was the beginning. Hours after the attacks, Iran responded with missiles and drones against Israel, against American bases in the Persian Gulf, and against United States allied nations in the region. Air raid sirens sounded in Tel Aviv. Explosions were recorded in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, and Manama, Bahrain. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard issued a statement prohibiting any ship from passing through the Strait of Hormuz and launched at least 21 confirmed attacks against commercial vessels. Sea mines were placed in the waters of the strait. Suddenly, the world realized something it perhaps had never seen so clearly. 25% of all oil transported by sea in the world passed through that strait. 20% of all the planet's liquefied natural gas as well. The world's largest liquefied natural gas plant in Qatar suffered missile damage that, according to Qatar Energy, will take up to 5 years to repair. 30% of all internationally traded fertilizers transit through Hormuz. The price of oil, which was around $72 a barrel before the conflict, jumped to $116. Analysts began talking about $200 a barrel if the situation were prolonged. The price of European natural gas rose by more than 70%. Scale this. The Philippines adopted a 4-day workweek to reduce fuel consumption. Japan, which imports 95% of its crude oil from Gulf countries, asked the government to release strategic reserves. Pakistan requested Saudi Arabia to redirect its oil shipments through the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, bypassing the closed strait. Saudi Arabia raised the capacity of its East-West pipeline to a historic high of 7 million barrels per day. The Dallas Federal Reserve estimated that the crisis could reduce global GDP growth by 2.9 percentage points in the second quarter of 2026, raising the average price of oil to $98 a barrel. And if the closure lasted 3 quarters, the price could reach $132 a barrel. This is no longer just another regional crisis. It is the largest disruption to the global energy supply since the oil crisis of the 70s. Now observe what happens when you place the scriptures side by side with these events. The prophet Ezekiel, in chapters 38 and 39, describes a great coalition of nations that rises against Israel in the latter days. Among these nations is Persia. Persia is modern Iran. The name was officially changed in 1935, but the geographical, cultural, and prophetic identity is the same. Ezekiel describes a confederation led by Gog of the land of Magog, which includes Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, among others. The text says these nations will come like a storm and cover the land like a cloud, and it says this will happen in the latter years. For decades, biblical scholars debated whether Iran would actually engage in a direct conflict with Israel. That debate is over. What was once theory is now a newspaper headline, and it is not just Iran. Consider the other players on the board. Hezbollah, Iran's armed wing in Lebanon, entered the war on the 2nd of March 2026, firing rockets and missiles at Israel in retaliation for Khamenei's death. Israel responded with what it described as the largest wave of coordinated attacks against Lebanon since the start of the operation, hitting more than 100 targets in 10 minutes on the 8th of April. This single day, which the Lebanese called Black Wednesday, killed at least 357 people and injured more than 1,150. Israel named the attack Operation Eternal Darkness. Hospitals in Beirut became overcrowded. The American University of Beirut Medical Center made an urgent appeal for blood donations. Lebanese Red Cross ambulances, more than 100 of them, were mobilized simultaneously. More than 1,200,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon since the 2nd of March. This represents 20% of the country's entire population. 350,000 children are among the displaced. More than 200,000 people fled to Syria. 9 bridges along the Litani River were destroyed by Israeli strikes, cutting off access routes to southern Lebanon. The only bridge still functioning, the Kazmi Bridge, was damaged on the 8th of April, but remains operable as the last link between southern Lebanon and the rest of the country. And here a question arises that should make anyone stop and reflect. How is it possible that the same lands mentioned in biblical prophecies more than 2,500 years ago are exactly the lands that are in flames today? Biblical Lebanon, which in ancient times was the territory inhabited by the Phoenicians, and where King Hiram of Tyre provided cedars for the construction of Solomon's temple, is the same Lebanon where today more than 1,700 people have been killed since the beginning of March. Tyre, the city that Ezekiel prophesied would be destroyed in chapter 26, is the same city where Israeli bombings hit residential areas in April 2026. The geographical correspondence is staggering. And Iraq? In the month of March, more than 80 drone attacks and bombings were carried out by pro-Iranian militias against American facilities in Iraq. The Islamic resistance in Iraq attacked Syrian military bases, including the Al-Tanf base, which previously housed American forces. The United States responded with about 100 airstrikes against positions of the Popular Mobilization Forces. Iraq, which in biblical times was Babylon, has once again become a battlefield. Daniel chapter 11 speaks of conflicts in the time of the end, involving the king of the north and the king of the south, with battles spreading throughout the region. But one piece is still missing, and perhaps it is the most disturbing of all. If you have been following these events, you know that the ceasefire attempt at stake is that of the 8th of April, 2026. Pakistan mediated a 2-week agreement between the United States and Iran. High-level negotiations were scheduled to begin on Saturday, the 11th of April, in Islamabad. But the agreement was born fragile. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire. American President Donald Trump confirmed that Lebanon was out, but French President Emmanuel Macron said that Lebanon was fully included. Pakistan, the mediator of the agreement, said the ceasefire covered all places, including Lebanon. Diplomats heard by CBS News said that initially Trump had included Lebanon in the agreement and that even Israel had agreed to those terms. Then, hours after the announcement of the ceasefire, Israel launched its largest wave of attacks against Lebanon. 300 people killed in a single day. Hezbollah had signaled a pause in attacks according to the ceasefire. Israel called its attacks Operation Eternal Darkness. Eternal Darkness. Iran responded by threatening to attack Israel if the aggressions against Lebanon did not cease immediately. The Strait of Hormuz, which was supposedly to be reopened as part of the ceasefire agreement, remained effectively closed, with Iran limiting the number of ships that can cross and charging transit fees. An advisor to the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who is the son of Ali Khamenei and was designated as successor on the 8th of March, threatened to also close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. If this happened, a quarter of the entire world's energy supply would be blocked. And it is at this point that the biblical narrative and the geopolitical narrative intersect in a way that is impossible to ignore. Jesus, in Matthew chapter 24, told his disciples that in the end times there would be wars and rumors of wars, nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, famines and earthquakes in various places. And he added something that often goes unnoticed. All these are the beginning of sorrows. The Greek word used there is odinas, which literally means birth pains. And what happens with birth pains? They start spaced out, then they become more frequent, then more intense, and in the end they come one after another, almost without interval. But what if this happened in every era of history? Wars have always existed, famines have always existed, earthquakes have always existed. So, what makes April 2026 different from any other moment? The answer lies in speed and convergence. Before 2023, Iran had never attacked Israel directly with missiles. In 2024, it did so for the first time. In June 2025, there was a 12-day war between Iran, Israel, and the United States, with American attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. In January 2026, the Iranian regime massacred thousands of civilians in the repression of the largest protests since the revolution of 1979. In February 2026, the supreme leader of Iran was assassinated. In March, the Strait of Hormuz was closed. In April, Lebanon experiences its largest displacement crisis in decades. Each event led to the next. Each escalation surpassed the previous one. The interval between them became shorter and shorter. This is not theory. These are verifiable facts with dates, numbers, and sources. And look at what happens to Israel in this scenario. The same Israel that in 2023 faced Hamas in Gaza now simultaneously faces Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen, and Iran directly. The prophet Zechariah, in chapter 12, verse 3, says that Jerusalem will become a heavy stone for all peoples, and that all who try to heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, and it says that all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Now, if you think this is just coincidence, consider one more detail. Gaza, which was the epicenter of the conflict in 2023 and 2024, had a ceasefire signed in October 2025, mediated by the United States. The plan included 20 points, with the demilitarization of Hamas, an international stabilization force of 12,000 police and 20,000 soldiers, and reconstruction estimated at $70 billion. 10 countries promised $17 billion. Albania, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, and Morocco promised troops. But Indonesia, which had promised up to 8,000 soldiers, put its participation on hold because of the Iran crisis. 6 months after the ceasefire, more than 700 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. More than 2,000 violations of the agreement were documented. No significant reconstruction has begun. 2 million people continue to live in uncertainty. It wasn't just that. When you look at the full map, you realize that every piece of the prophetic puzzle is moving at the same time. Israel is surrounded by conflict on all fronts. Iran, which funded the so-called Axis of Resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, Houthis, is destabilized by the death of its leader and the destruction of its military infrastructure, but continues to retaliate. Global trade is under pressure. Nations that were never in direct conflict are now exchanging missiles. Qatar, which always positioned itself as a neutral mediator, had its airport targeted in an Iranian attack attempt. Kuwait had a Hezbollah cell with 16 members arrested, carrying weapons, drones, and encrypted communication devices. And the succession in Iran. Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of Ali Khamenei, was designated as the new supreme leader on the 8th of March, a son succeeding his father in command of a theocracy. This had never happened in the history of the Islamic Republic. Before Khamenei's death, The natural candidate for succession was President Ibrahim Raisi, but he died in a helicopter accident in May 2024. Iran faced an unprecedented leadership crisis, and the solution was dynastic. A leadership council was formed, including President Masoud Pezeshkian and the head of the judiciary, but real power went to Mujtaba. If you know the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7, you know that the prophet saw 4 great empires represented by animals. The last of them had 10 horns, and among them arose a little horn that plucked out 3 others. Many scholars interpret these empires as Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, with the last representing a power confederation in the latter days. Others see there a reference to powers that will rise and fall quickly in the final times. What is undeniable is that Daniel described a period of accelerated political instability, where leaders fall and are replaced in rapid sequence. Ali Khamenei ruled for 37 years. He was the longest-serving leader in the Middle East. His predecessor, Khomeini, ruled for 10 years. Together, 2 men controlled Iran for 47 years, and in one early morning in February, everything changed. Total silence in Tehran, then chaos. Documents and analyses show that the decision to attack Khamenei was made because American and Israeli intelligence agencies concluded that he was personally the obstacle to any nuclear deal. A man in his 80s, described as extraordinarily stubborn, who would not change course. The operation involved months of strategic and operational deception of satellite imagery, according to a spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces. On the night of the attack, Israeli commanders took their official cars home so that satellite images would not show the military base prepared for the attack. Entire months of preparation for 30 seconds of execution. And while all this was happening, Vladimir Putin's Russia called Khamenei's death a cynical assassination. China said the attack was unacceptable and condemned the flagrant killing of a sovereign leader and the incitement of regime change. In India, thousands of Shia Muslims took to the streets in protests in several states. In Bangladesh, Jamaat-e-Islami organized demonstrations calling for intervention by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. In Athens, more than 1,300 protesters gathered with banners saying "Hands off Iran." In Baghdad, protesters tried to approach the American embassy, resulting in clashes with security forces. Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, describes the second seal being opened and a red horse coming out. To the rider was given power to take peace from the earth and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Verses 5 and 6 describe the third seal, a black horse, and a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." This is a description of severe inflation in food and commodity prices. What is the scenario of April 2026? Armed conflict spreading across multiple nations, peace being taken from the earth, and the price of fertilizers, 20% to 30% of which transit through the Strait of Hormuz, skyrocketing. The price of urea at the New Orleans terminal rose from $475 per metric ton to $680, and this in the soybean and corn planting window of the American Midwest. Analysts warned that if these shipments are blocked during the planting season, the impact on food inflation will be devastating. Peace being taken from the earth, food becoming more expensive, nations rising against each other. If this sounds familiar to you, it is because Jesus said it would be exactly like this. But there is something that many people know about these events and do not realize the real depth of what is happening. Because following news is one thing. Understanding the spiritual meaning behind them is another entirely. And it is exactly here that many stay on the surface. You know there is conflict. You know Iran was attacked. You know Lebanon is at war. But when was the last time you stopped to understand what the scriptures actually say about this moment? Not what pastors interpret, not what news channels speculate, but what the biblical text in its essence reveals. It is this deepening that led thousands of people to access the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. Because understanding prophetic times inevitably leads to the central point of the entire Bible, Christ's sacrifice on the cross and the meaning of every word he pronounced at that moment. If you want to go beyond the headlines and dive into the depth of the biblical message, Just take your phone now, open the camera app, and point it at the square code appearing on the screen. The secure link will appear automatically. Just tap it to access the digital book. If you prefer, the link is also in the video description. On mobile, tap the video title or the More option to see the description. On a computer or television, look just below the video where the link appears. Many people are already discovering the depth of these words and transforming their faith. And by accessing the book, you also help keep this channel active and continue producing biblical content like this. Access now and comment Amen below. Now returning to the events, because history has not stopped. On the 7th of April, Israel deployed the 98th Division in southern Lebanon, adding to 4 other divisions already positioned there: the 36th, the 91st, the 146th, and the 162nd. The stated objective was to destroy buildings used for military purposes near the border and push Hezbollah members north of the Litani River, which is about 30 kilometers from the border. According to the Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth, the Israeli armed forces were preparing a plan to continue operations and ground occupation in Lebanon, even after the war with Iran ended. Meanwhile, Hezbollah reported fierce clashes between its fighters and Israeli troops in Bint Jbeil, including rocket and drone attacks against soldiers and Merkava tanks. Israeli troops destroyed buildings in Qiyam and other border towns. Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem was designated as a target for elimination. A vice president of Hezbollah's political council, Mahmoud Kamati, threatened to topple the cabinet of Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam after the war, comparing it to the Vichy regime in France. Observe the scale of what is happening. 5 Israeli military divisions in southern Lebanon forced evacuation orders covering more than 1,470 square kilometers, or 14% of the entire Lebanese territory. Families sleeping in cars, on the streets, in schools turned into shelters. The World Food Programme warned that Lebanon faces a food insecurity crisis, and all this happening while the international community debates whether or not Lebanon is included in the ceasefire. Then another element arises. On the 6th of April, Ali Akbar Velayati, former Iranian foreign minister and veteran advisor to the new supreme leader, posted on the social network X that the unified command of the resistance front sees the Bab al-Mandeb as it sees Hormuz. And he added, "If the White House dares to repeat its foolish mistakes, it will soon realize that the flow of global energy and trade can be interrupted with a single move." The Houthis in Yemen, who had already blocked the Bab al-Mandeb during the Gaza war in 2023 and 2024, have the proven capability to do so again. If the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandeb were closed simultaneously, a quarter of the world's entire energy supply would be blocked. A quarter. Revelation chapter 6 verse 8 speaks of the 4th seal and says that to the rider was given power over the 4th part of the earth to kill with sword and with hunger and with death and with the beasts of the earth. 4th part. I am not claiming that this prophecy is being literally fulfilled at this moment. I am saying that the coincidence between biblical texts and current events is too great to be ignored by anyone who takes the Bible seriously. Now it is important to clearly separate facts from interpretations. Fact: the supreme leader of Iran was killed in a joint attack by Israel and the United States. Fact: the Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed since February. Fact: more than 1,200,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon. Fact: the price of oil has risen more than 60% since the start of the conflict. Fact: at least 10 nations are directly or indirectly involved in this conflict. Fact: Iran lost its supreme leader, its Minister of Defense, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard, and the Secretary of the National Security Council in a single attack. Fact: the world's largest liquefied natural gas plant suffered damage that will take up to 5 years to repair. Interpretation: these events fit multiple prophetic descriptions from the books of Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, and Revelation. This distinction matters because the Bible is not a newspaper that gives modern dates and names. It works with principles, patterns, and types. And what April 2026 reveals is not necessarily the final fulfillment of a specific prophecy. It is the acceleration of a pattern that the scriptures describe as characteristic of the end times. Revelations like this make the heart race, don't they? And perhaps at this moment, as you absorb the magnitude of what is happening, there is a restlessness within you that goes beyond curiosity. This restlessness has a name. It is called spiritual awakening. And it was exactly for those who feel this that the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, was prepared. Because if the signs are accelerating, understanding Christ's final words is not optional. It is urgent. Take your phone, open the camera and point it at the QR code on the screen, or access through the link in the video description. By accessing, you also strengthen this channel to continue bringing this content. Access now. Let's move forward, because there is a dimension of these events that is rarely discussed, and it has to do with the human dimension of the catastrophe. When we talk about numbers, 1,700 deaths in Lebanon, 357 in a single day, 1,200,000 displaced people, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that each number is a person. A family waking up in the early morning to explosions, a mother carrying a child on her back for miles of destroyed road, a father who went out to buy bread and never returned, a doctor performing emergency surgeries without enough anesthesia because supplies do not arrive. In Tyre, southern Lebanon, Human Rights Watch researchers interviewed displaced residents who said, "If they destroy the bridge, where do we go? There is nowhere to go." All 9 bridges along the Litani River were destroyed. Roads between villages in the Bekaa Valley were cut. The Israeli evacuation order covered 40 kilometers from the border, pushing entire populations north. In southern Lebanon, towns like Jal al-Dir, Jabal Blat, and Qiyam faced total displacement of their populations as Israel established new military posts. And in Beirut, on the 8th of April, the attacks hit busy commercial and residential areas during rush hour without prior warning. 50 fighter jets and about 160 munitions were used. Plumes of smoke rose over the capital as panicked people ran through the streets. Dr. Tanya Baban, director of a Chicago-based medical nonprofit, described the situation as total chaos and said the attacks hit civilian areas without any warning. This is not a statistic. It is human suffering on an industrial scale, and now, an intensification that few people are following. In Iraq, the front that was previously secondary has become one of the most active theaters of the conflict. Pro-Iranian militias expanded their targets to include energy infrastructure in northern Iraq, such as the Lanaz refinery in Erbil and the Sarsang oil field in Duhok. The United States withdrew troops from the strategic Al-Tanf base in Syria in February 2026, handing it over to the Damascus government. This withdrawal was described by Reuters as a historic milestone. But in Iraq, the American presence remains, and attacks are intensifying. Biblical Babylon is burning again, and on the seas. The Iranian fleet was practically destroyed. American Central Command reported that at least 17 Iranian ships were destroyed by the 3rd of March, and that there was not a single Iranian ship in operation in the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Oman. But the sea mines remain. Attacks on commercial ships continue, and the cost of war risk insurance for ships transiting the strait jumped from 0.125% to between 0.2 and 0.4% of the ship's insurance value per crossing. For supertankers, this represents an increase of $250,000 per trip. Major shipping companies like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd have already suspended their routes in the Middle East. And here is a data point that should make any student of biblical prophecy pay attention. 84% of all oil that passed through the Strait of Hormuz in 2024 was destined for Asian markets. China received a third of its oil through this route. India imports more than 50% of its oil from the Middle East. South Korea has net oil imports equivalent to 2.7% of its GDP. Thailand has the highest net oil imports in Asia, representing 4.7% of GDP. Global interdependence has never been so visible and so vulnerable. Daniel chapter 2 describes the statue from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, with a head of gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. The feet of iron and clay represent, according to the text, a kingdom that will be partly strong and partly fragile. And it says that as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Interdependent nations but unable to unite. Alliances that seem strong on the outside, but are fragile on the inside. Consider the situation. The United States and Israel are allies, but Trump and Netanyahu publicly diverge on the ceasefire and on Lebanon. Iran and Hezbollah are allies, but Lebanon banned Hezbollah military activities after the attacks. Qatar denied having attacked Iran, despite reports that it intercepted Iranian Su-24 bombers and retaliated. OPEC+, which includes nations on opposite sides of the conflict, promised to increase oil production by 206,000 barrels per day to stabilize markets. Iron mixed with clay, together but separate, strong but fragile. And while the whole world looks at the Middle East, a crucial detail escapes most people. For the first time in decades, the Iranian nuclear issue is permanently altered. The February attacks hit the Natanz nuclear facility. Iran's nuclear infrastructure, ballistic missile depots, and naval assets were priority targets. The Iranian nuclear program, which for decades was the source of endless negotiations, the 2015 deal torn up by Trump in 2018, the failed negotiations in Geneva. The incessant diplomatic pressure was addressed not by diplomacy, but by military force. The Omani mediator had said there was significant progress in the February nuclear negotiations, with Iran willing to make concessions. But Trump said he was not enthusiastic about the negotiations. Days later, the attacks began. From negotiations to bombings in less than a week. And what does the Bible say about false peace? Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 3 writes, "For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." Peace and safety being announced, and sudden destruction coming next. This pattern repeated in 2024, when the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in November lasted only days before attacks resumed. It repeated in October 2025, when the Gaza ceasefire was signed, but more than 700 Palestinians were killed in the following 6 months. And it repeated on the 8th of April 2026, when the ceasefire between the United States and Iran was announced, and hours later, 357 people died in Lebanon. Peace announced, immediate destruction. The acceleration of these cycles is what many theologians and biblical scholars call prophetic compression, the shortening of the interval between events that fit biblical patterns. It is not that each individual event is necessarily a prophetic fulfillment. It is that the frequency, intensity, and geographical convergence of these events align with what the scriptures describe as the threshold of the end. And this compression has a spiritual purpose that cannot be ignored. Each conflict that intensifies, each treaty that fails, each leader who falls, is pointing to something that transcends geopolitics. It is pointing to the urgent need to understand Christ's words not as ancient history, but as living instruction for the present moment. And it is this urgency that led so many people to seek the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, a material that reveals the profound dimension of each word pronounced by Jesus on the cross at the most decisive moment in human history. Point your phone's camera at the QR code on the screen now, or access through the link in the video description. On mobile, tap the video title to open the description. On a computer, the link is just below. Your decision to access this content directly strengthens the work of this channel. Access and comment, Amen. And here is what is perhaps the most important point of this entire narrative. The comparisons between the current scenario and previous periods of history are revealing. In the oil crisis of 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, the Arab embargo quadrupled the price of oil and plunged the world into recession. But at that time, the conflict mainly involved Israel and its immediate neighbors, Egypt and Syria. In 2026, the conflict involves Israel, the United States, Iran, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Pakistan as mediator, Turkey, Egypt, and indirectly China Russia, and all of Europe due to the energy crisis. In the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the Strait of Hormuz was not actually closed. In the Iran-Iraq War of the 80s, there were attacks on ships, but the strait remained open. In the Gulf War of 1990, Iran remained neutral. 2026 is the first time the Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed as a weapon of war. This has no parallel in modern history. And the scale of the impact, 20% of the global oil supply, 30% of fertilizers, 20% of liquefied natural gas, is proportional to what biblical prophecies describe as disturbances affecting all the earth. And the most staggering thing is that all this is happening in the same geographical region that the Bible points to as the stage for the final events. The Euphrates Valley, mentioned in Revelation chapter 9 as the place where 4 angels are bound and will be loosed to kill the third part of men. The Euphrates passes through Iraq, biblical Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, and Iran, the Persia of Ezekiel, and Israel, the nation restored according to Ezekiel chapter 37, and Lebanon, the land of cedars, and Egypt, mediator of so many peace attempts. Every name in the news was already in the scriptures. When you look at the map of the Middle East in April 2026, what you see is not just geopolitics, it is the exact geography of biblical prophecies taking shape in real time. Persia, Lebanon, Israel, the Gulf nations. Every name that appears in the news today already appeared in the pages of Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation thousands of years ago. And the most impressive thing is not that these things are happening, it is the speed at which they are happening. In 40 days the world changed more than in 40 years. But here is the point that many lose. The Bible never revealed these signs to cause fear. It revealed them to cause preparation. Each fulfilled prophecy is not a reason for despair. It is a confirmation that there is a sovereign plan above all human chaos. And if there is a plan, there is someone conducting that plan. The question that remains is not whether the end time is accelerating. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Because in the end, when the dust of the missiles settles and the treaties are signed or torn up, what will remain are not empires, not military alliances, not oil reserves. What will remain is that which was built upon the rock, and that rock has a name. And it is exactly for this reason that understanding the final words of Jesus on the cross is not an academic exercise or a historical curiosity. It is the most urgent spiritual act you can take at a moment like this. The 7 last words of Christ were not just phrases said by a dying man. They were declarations that defined the destiny of humanity and that carry a power that remains alive today. If the signs of the times are accelerating, and the facts show they are, then the moment to seek this depth is now, not tomorrow. Not when there is time. Now. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, was prepared to reveal the meaning that most people never noticed in these words. To access, take your phone, open the camera, and point it at the QR code on the screen. A secure link will appear automatically, just tap it. If you prefer, the link is also available in the description of this video. On mobile, tap the video title or the More option to open the description. On a computer or television, the link appears just below the video. By accessing, you also contribute to this channel, continuing to produce content that deepens faith and illuminates the times in which we live. Access now, and comment Amen below so that more people see this message.